Welcome to the Pushkin State Museum of Fine Arts in Moscow. Opened in 1912 and named for Tsar Alexander III, the museum's tumultuous history traces that of Russia in the last century. After the revolution, Soviet authorities renamed the museum for a different Alexander, Pushkin, poet, playwright, and literary hero. The museum's 700,000 objects give us a singular portrait of cultures from around the world, as seen by the generations of Russian curators who assembled the collection. One of those cultures is that of the Jews, and this is the focus of our visit. But we won't be looking at Jewish culture in Russia. Instead, we'll be looking at the museum's collection from Egypt, and from an era when Jews lived and thrived there, although they weren't supposed to be there at all. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. And a mixed multitude went up with them, and large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. The book of Exodus, known in Hebrew as Shmot, tells the story of the central event in Jewish history, the journey of Hebrew slaves out of Egypt to freedom in the land of Israel. The date of the Exodus is sometimes placed around 1470 BCE, sometimes 2 or 3 centuries later. The truth is, historians don't know when it happened or if it really happened at all. But Jewish tradition has no doubt that it did, and the story is told every year at Passover. For millennia, Jews have defined themselves as a people who left Egypt. So why do they keep popping up there? This is Elephantine Island on the Nile River in southern Egypt. An ancient garrison town stood here about 2,500 years ago. The plan of the town, reconstructed by archaeologists, shows the temple of an Egyptian fertility god, Khnum. That's not surprising. What's unusual is the building across the street, a Jewish temple. The remarkable remains at Elephantine Island show that a garrison of Jewish soldiers thrived here with their families for about 200 years, between the 7th and 5th centuries BCE. This is surprising for at least 2 reasons. One is that the famous Jewish temple in Jerusalem existed at precisely the same time, and was supposed to be the only temple to the God of Israel. And yet, oddly, there seems to have been another one in Egypt. Another surprise is that this Jewish community was living and worshipping at the site perhaps 8 centuries after Moses was supposed to have led all of the Israelites out of Egypt altogether. What were they doing here? Part of the answer lies not in Egypt or in the land of Israel, but far to the east, in Persia, home of the Achaemenid Empire, whose most famous king was Cyrus the Great. At this time, the empire ruled Egypt and most of the Middle East. The Jewish soldiers here were mercenaries working for the Persians, guarding a remote border on behalf of the imperial authorities. It was similar to the way the British once used Gurkha or Sikh troops in far-flung parts of their empire. In the collection of the Pushkin Museum, there's a tiny object that tells part of this story. It's a seal from the 5th century BCE. The seal was bought from an antiquities dealer in Cairo in the 1800s, a time when records were scanty, so its precise origins aren't clear, but it tells the same imperial story of which the Jews of Elephantine Island were part. The name that appears on the seal is carved uniquely in both ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and in Aramaic. The name is Haren Hebbe. That can be translated from the ancient Egyptian as Horus from Cheb, Horus being one of the main Egyptian gods, and Cheb being the name of a place, probably the town of Chemis, known in modern Egypt as Akhmim. But that doesn't mean the owner of the seal actually lived there. The name of the city might just be part of the name, like the last name Odesky from Odessa, or Lvovsky, which refers to the city of Lvov or Lviv in Ukraine. Below the Egyptian hieroglyphics is the same name in Aramaic letters, the kind that would evolve into the modern Hebrew script in use today. The letters Chet and Resh represent the first part of the name, the part that means Horus, while the letters Chet and Bet spell the name of the city, Cheb. The last letter, Yud, is the ending I. So in Aramaic, the name is written Har-Hebbi. This Har-Hebbi, or Harin-Hebbi, seems to have been an imperial official. The Achaemenid Empire's vast territory meant a lot of paperwork and a lot of bureaucrats. Aramaic was the administration's official language and was sometimes known simply as imperial. At the empire's outpost on Elephantine Island, some residents spoke Aramaic and some spoke Egyptian. Some seals from this period, from the Persian-dominated land of Israel, for example, give the occupation of the owner: Yiddo, palace steward, or Pilayahu, forced labor supervisor. Our seal doesn't list an occupation. What we do know is that only a wealthy person would have possessed a seal like this one, carved from a precious material called chalcedony, a kind of fine quartz. Poorer people used seals made of clay, or sometimes simply left the imprint of a fingernail. Expensive seals like this one were used for documents written on papyrus or parchment. The document was rolled and folded so that a description of the contents remained visible on top. The document was then tied with string and fixed with a lump of soft clay that was then marked with the seal. The seal documents that have come to light aren't literary or religious texts. They're usually legal documents related to a sale or a purchase or the giving of a gift. Some are prenuptial agreements between ancient grooms and brides. Like this one, from Elephantine Island, also from the 5th century BCE. It's between a man with the Hebrew name Anania, who worked at the Jewish temple on the island, and Tamit, an Egyptian maid. Tamit brought in her arms 1 woolen garment worth 7 shekels of silver, 1 mirror worth 7.5 haluru of silver, 1 pair of sandals, half a handle of balsamic oil, 6 handfuls of castor oil, 1 tray. Marriages between Jews and Egyptians here seem not to have been rare. The agreement says Tamit will give her son, Pilti, to her new husband as a slave. And that was common practice in ancient times when slavery was accepted and children were considered valuable labor. The contract also lays out what happens if things don't work out. In case of divorce, Anania promised to pay a fine of 7 shekels and return everything Tamit had brought to the marriage, down to the very last thread and straw. The contract also gives Tamit, the bride, the right to file for divorce. If she did, she'd have to pay her ex-husband 7 shekels, but she could keep her belongings. The agreement was supposed to protect the property rights of both husband and wife, but it was aimed above all at protecting the woman from ending up on the street and starving to death if she was divorced or widowed. That's why it was particularly important for her to seal the document for posterity. This papyrus was found with its seal intact, so we can assume, or at least hope, that Anania and Tamit never needed the contract and lived happily ever after, embodying the strange and largely forgotten marriage of the Egyptian and Jewish civilizations on their beautiful island in the Nile.